Senator Tom Cotton, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Mark, it's good to be back on with you.
I can call you my friend, can't I? I consider you a friend anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, here's the thing. You put out a press release, and it caused me to follow up here. There's this group called the Movement for Quality Government. It's supposed to be a nonprofit Israeli group, one of these phony NGOs. And since 2020, reports Free Beacon, Adam Credo, the United States State Department has put in $38,000, and God knows what else they've done with this group. And this group is doing everything it can to overthrow the Netanyahu administration, to cause violent, disobedience in domestically in Israel, attack the judicial reforms Netanyahu is proposing. Why in the hell are we funding this?
That is a great question, Mark. Why are we funding any NGOs in a country like Israel that claim to be, quote unquote, promoting democracy? Israel is a very healthy, robust democracy. This is not Burma. This is not hurricane or tsunami relief for a country like Indonesia. We should not be sending Americans' tax dollars to advanced industrial democracies to support their charities. They don't send them here to support ours. We shouldn't be sending it there. That's a very different thing from, say, supporting Israel's military with defense aid. That's my first point. The second point is it's not surprising that Biden's State Department is doing this, because Democrats have been trying to beat Benjamin Netanyahu for more than a quarter century. In 1996, by his own admission, Bill Clinton put a finger on the scale for Shimon Peres, held meetings with him leading up to the election, dispatched his top campaign team, James Carville and Stan Greenberg and the rest. Bibi still beat them, though. Now, 3 years later, with the help of Clinton, Ehud Barak was able to win that election. Now, Bibi was more of a victim of his own success by stopping the waves of terrorism that Oslo had unleashed while he was prime minister. But then he was back in power 10 years later, and you saw the same thing with the Obama administration. Even worse, they also were funding NGOs in Israel that were designed to attack Benjamin Netanyahu and undermine his government, defeat him for re-election. And Barack Obama also sent his campaign team there to help Benjamin Netanyahu's then opponents. And you get the same thing with Joe Biden, funding these NGOs, leaning on allies not to celebrate the Abraham Accords for elections, trying to thwart Bibi from forming a coalition last fall. For more than a quarter century, Democrats have been trying to beat Benjamin Netanyahu. Fortunately for the people of Israel, fortunately for America's national security interests, they almost always lose.
And they're making an issue out of these judicial reforms, which are very much like the way our country operates, and they're seizing on this, as well as fools like Thomas Friedman at the New York Times. You might be familiar with the New York Times and some of these other entities. Again, in order to try and take down this sitting government. And it's like the radicals in America, the radicals in Israel, they're doing everything they possibly can to overthrow Netanyahu's government when he's trying to face down the Iranians, which are days away from having a nuclear weapon. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does not, Mark. The thing about the judicial reform debate in Israel, Israelis are more incapable of handling that themselves. The Israeli people, working through their elected representatives, are perfectly able to debate and decide what kind of reforms, if any, they want to pursue. But here's what they can't do. They can't defeat Iran's nuclear program without America's help. They can't make peace with their Arab neighbors without America's help. They can't beat back the terrorists that threaten both Israel and America without America's help. So the Democrats should leave Israel's domestic affairs to Israelis. There's no need to meddle there. What we need to do is help Israel defeat our common enemies, and yet again, the Biden administration is not doing that.
And this is frightening to me, because if Iran gets nukes, then that whole area of the world changes, and they will blackmail us, they will make threats. It becomes incredibly complicated on how we even deal with that part of the world. You have Saudi Arabia that's going to nuke up more likely than not. Do you get the sense that this administration is working with Congress or anybody in the possibility that Israel says, look, we cannot tolerate this, we have to go in?
Yeah. No, I don't, Mark, unfortunately. Just look at the situation with North Korea. North Korea is a small, isolated country at the end of the world, a hermit kingdom. They have nuclear weapons. And look how that paralyzes the United States and South Korea and Japan and our policy towards North Korea. Contrast that with Iran, a large nation at the crossroads of humanity, an ancient civilization, which is run by theocratic fanatics dedicated to Israel's destruction and America's destruction. You say the consequences of Iran having a nuclear umbrella are so grave for America and for Israel, for their Arab neighbors, and for world stability and peace. Yet the Biden administration is largely sticking its head in the sand. They want to keep blaming Donald Trump. The facts of the matter are Iran's progress towards nuclear breakout has happened almost entirely on Joe Biden's watch. We just had our annual threat assessment hearing today, Mark, at the Intelligence Committee, the one time we have a public hearing all year long. I pointed out that in their written threat assessment, they said that our intelligence agency said Iran has accelerated its nuclear program since their nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was assassinated in November of 2020. And I just asked the Director of National Intelligence, really, the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who richly deserved it, that's what did it in November of 2020? Was there anything else that happened in November of 2020 that may have caused Iran to accelerate its nuclear program? And she acted clueless and said, it's the election of Joe Biden. Once Joe Biden...
And by the way, Senator, I have that clip that I was going to play later, and I will play later because I thought it was so profound. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, almost all of this has happened on Joe Biden's watch. Donald Trump left the nuclear deal in May of 2018. Iran did almost nothing until May of 2019, when they began to take a few incremental steps to violate the terms of that nuclear deal. In January of 2020, 7 months later, we killed Qasem Soleimani, their terrorist mastermind, and they didn't do anything until November of 2020, when it became clear that clueless ideologue Joe Biden was going to become the president, and he was going to rush to get back in the nuclear deal. Even today, even with Iran supplying Russia with missiles and drones to attack Ukraine, even with them making totally unreasonable demands, still trying to kill Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and others, the administration won't say that the nuclear deal with Iran is dead and never coming back, because then they would be forced to acknowledge what their next step would be, and they don't want to acknowledge that step, because the only thing you can do is to crack down Iran even further and keep open the possibility of military action against those nuclear sites.
I just feel we're not prepared for this to support the Israelis in their effort. We're not prepared if China invades Taiwan. We're not building up our defenses, that is, our defense spending the way we should, minus the woke stuff, obviously. Am I wrong about this?
No, Mark, unfortunately, you're not wrong at all. We certainly are taking the steps we need to help Israel be prepared. There are specific and concrete steps we could take to help Israel deter Iran from a nuclear breakout, whether it's providing certain kinds of aircraft or certain kinds of munitions. In Taiwan, what we need to do is what you alluded to on our own defenses, which is rapidly build out our industrial base. We've had too much consolidation since the end of the Cold War. There are too few suppliers, both at the prime contractor level and at the subcontractor level. If Raytheon and Lockheed can't get ball bearings or gaskets or valves or chips or steel or aluminum, it doesn't matter how fast they can assemble these weapons. But I've sat through so many meetings now over the last year where Pentagon officials are dislocating their shoulder, patting themselves on the back for getting the timeline for production of one of these weapons from, say, 3 or 4 years down to 18 months. Well, that's great, but it really shouldn't be 2 or 3 months. And it's going to take a focused and intense leadership at the Pentagon to actually get past these bottlenecks. Bob Gates did this in 2007. He came into a Pentagon that was still not focused on the immediate challenges right in front of it, and he had to move heaven and earth to get more mine-resistant vehicles and unmanned surveillance drones to us in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he did it. But that's the kind of effort it takes. And it's critical. It's critical to deter the threat that we face in the Western Pacific from China. It's also critical to deter countries like Iran as well.